Welcome back. And I have a lot of exciting news to share. A lot of it is because whenever I go out into nature, I always have these sort of epiphanies, and I tend to kind of text them to myself, almost to remind myself that I want to talk about this when I get back. And then I think, well, why don't I do this in nature, like outside, and record myself? But then I wonder how how tricky it would look to be recording myself as I'm walking. So then I change my mind. But then I kind of think about, well, I mean, it's not that abnormal. Like sometimes it's good to try something new and then give people ideas to be brave about them, and then there you go. It's not something that looks very strange anymore. But anyway, building on the last video where I talked a lot about different learning styles, how to be a critical thinker, and how to know how to create priorities. So how to decide what is it that I want to focus my ideas around and what I want to kind of research a little bit more. And then what is it that I want to understand how to think newly about or creatively about one of those ideas. So this is called prioritizing, where you kind of create a list and you think what's most important, what's second, what's third, and then as you begin to research, you decide, well, they're kind of all kind of connected to each other. So it's hard to say that one of them is really more important than the other. And then you'll start to kind of create this really cool, almost like I almost want to call it kind of like a disco ball, where it looks like it's one cool mirror and it just has different reflections on it that kind of create a lot of new meanings for you. So my first question was, when we're thinking about science and religion, we don't have to try to understand that they're going to be antagonistic to each other, that they're never going to align. And I'm going to talk about this later when I talk about some of the beliefs that some people maybe used to answer or to kind of conclude why we shouldn't mix religion and science. So, one of the things are, um, we don't really know what age, or like back 2000 years ago, we probably didn't really know what age it was that people can start to think abstractly. So right now we know that's 12 years old, around 13 years old. Abstractly means that they can put an idea in their mind and think about it without having to have something concrete in front of them, right? So let's, for example, say that um, if I say to you, can you fill my cup, right? You can kind of see that this is see-through. So you see that inside it's already full of little candies, right? So if I say that to you and you're a little kid, you can be like fill it with what? It's already full. So if I had never already told you before that, what I mean is, can you fill my heart with an idea that's going to be like candy, like it's going to be a sweet idea that's going to make me feel warm inside? That's a metaphor. That's an abstract idea. That something concrete, which is something that you can see and make an understanding about, helps you make that abstract idea. So if I empty all this now and I say, hey, can you fill my cup? Then you're going to be like, sure, what do you want to drink? And then I'll say, just water. And then you go fill it up, you get me water, and I have something to drink. That's concrete, which means there's no other understanding other than, can you fill my cup with something for me to drink? Now, because I didn't specify and say, can you give me some water? Can you give me some milk? Can you give me some juice? I'm almost trying to engage in conversation with you. Like I almost want you to maybe tell me what options you have, because maybe I'm a guest and I don't know what to ask, because I don't want to make you feel embarrassed and say, oh, sorry, we don't have that. And then maybe you feel bad. So all these different kind of nuances are really wonderful ways that people learn how to talk with each other, to almost create a way of creating a culture that's friendly and it's just kind, and you kind of like, it creates a sort of delight when you try to figure out what these little quizzes are and like, oh my gosh, I love how you said that. So when we're trying to understand how to learn something, sometimes we want to learn like all of it at once. And like I said before, if you jump into it too much and you think, like, I want to learn all of this, and you create a huge, massive list and you start to, you spend an entire day and you're like, I don't even want to take a break. I'm just going to do it all. And then halfway through the day, you're like tired and you're like, no, 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 I can do it. I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to go eat. I'm going to have something to eat. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to read some more, or I'm going to watch some more. And then maybe you do that for the second day and then the third day, and then your brain starts to get really tired. And then you look at your list and you're like, I'm still on the first thing. And that's when you know what priority means. It means that, remember we talked about there's different kinds of self. So there's the physical self, which means you should probably exercise. You should move around a lot because that helps your brain kind of wake up. Fresh oxygen is really healthy for your brain. You have to think of your psychological health. So it means if you're really, really stressed about something, then your mind needs a break, which means it needs something fun to do. That's not hard work for it, so it can relax and then think about something in a new way. Your mental health means if something is really making you feel like, I feel kind of bad about myself because I can't do this, then your brain starts to shut down because it feels like my, like almost like my heart is not happy with my brain. So it starts to work harder. And then the harder it works, the more the heart starts to feel like this isn't what I want. And then you feel that anxiety, and then it almost is difficult to align again. So that's your mental health. You need to take a break and find something relaxing. Sometimes listening to music, sometimes taking a nap is helpful. Sometimes finding a friend to talk to is really helpful too. And then you need your well, right now you're kind of working on your cognitive and cerebral psychological health, which is finding ways that are engaging for you to learn, because our brain loves to learn. It loves to always have puzzles to work on. And then the social self, which is a way to relax and a way to exchange ideas, which is healthy for your heart and for your mind. So now if you're doing all these things while you're learning new ways of learning, you're not going to feel like you're overstressed in one way, and you're never going to burn out, which means you're never going to have that burst of energy of doing something and then finding out that it's too big of a job and then you're going to give up too early. So if you learn to write a list and then decide, okay, I'm going to do this for five 5 hours, for example, like almost like a school day, which means I'm going to read for a little bit, I'm going to watch for a little bit, I'm going to maybe call my friend and maybe ask if I can go over and spend some time, and then after I come back, maybe I'll watch a movie with my mom or dad or my sister or my brother. Maybe if I have a pet, I'll go walk my pet. So now you're engaging all of these things in almost like what a school day is if you're still in summer vacation. So if this is like a weekend, you can also plan something like that. And then the rest of the day could be just something that you maybe just read a book and do something relaxing that's still kind of engaging your mind, but it's something completely different from what's on your list. So it's almost like a hobby of a kind. And the reason that it's good to have hobbies is because hobbies are supposed to be something that you like doing that's almost outside of what your mind is mostly focusing on, because it almost helps you think creatively. It helps you think of ways to put the two together, and it's not really work, it's just creatively, because you end up liking both really well. But one of them is something that you're actually trying to do as a goal, and the other one you're just like, yeah, if I get to it, I get to it. If I don't, I don't. Like some people who like to play instruments or put puzzles, actual jigsaw puzzles together, or some people who like knitting or stitching, lots of these really cool, or like painting, lots of options for hobbies. So you'll find that when you want to almost decide, okay, well, what is my favorite learning style? Like what way do I like to learn the best? And what subject? Because after you study all of them together, you're going to find, whoa, I really like learning about space, for example, or I really, really like learning about under the ocean, like marine life. And all these things are really good, but you're going to have to understand, like, there are some subjects that I'm going to have to really learn how to study really well. So biology is one of them. Physics is going to be one of them. And you're also going to have to understand how to think about the universe in a way that doesn't make you feel like you can hurt anything that you find that's natural life, right? So you have to understand, for example, if I go underwater, I can't do anything that's going to pollute the water that might hurt the underwater life. If I'm going out into outer space, I also have to be careful of what I'm creating. So I had a friend who, when I first started working, I used to work at a gym daycare for a little bit. And she had told me that if you've watched the movie Up, she said that somebody actually did that in real life, where they created, like, I don't know how many balloons, and they filled them up with helium and they sent them into the sky. I don't remember what the occasion was, but her first reaction was, that's not very friendly to the environment. Because in her mind, she was thinking, like, all that rubber, like, what if an animal thinks that's food and then eats it and then dies? It chokes on it. So some of these things we kind of have to be careful about. So from this, we can almost understand how do I be patient about something? That seems like a good idea, but then somebody reminds me and I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. So it's almost like, it feels like a little bit of a letdown, but maybe there's another way to celebrate. And then you can think of fireworks. So in this way, we almost know why we can find ways that help us discover what's a long-term pleasure and what's a short-term pleasure. So a long-term pleasure means I can do this for a very long time and I'll never get bored of it. So for example, if you like playing the piano, right? Some people enjoy it and they've gotten really good at it because they've been practicing it for a very long time, that it just brings them a little bit of calm. Some people, for example, they like to drink socially. So if you're an adult, you like to have like once a week, you like to get together with your friends and maybe just um, go to a restaurant and just have like something to drink, like wine or something. And then, you guys just spend some time talking, and then after that you go home and that's the end. So what you kind of understand from this is the people that are able to make these choices, it's because they've tried a lot of things and they decide, instead of maybe doing this every night, like going out for drinks every night, I just want to do it once a week. Because even though I like to drink alcohol and I like to do it with my friends because we get to talk and relax, what I know of myself is that if I drink alcohol, it actually gives me a headache if I drink too much of it. And it makes it really hard for me to think. And I really like that, how clear my mind is when I think. So then you already know this is actually a short-term pleasure and a long-term pleasure. So the long-term pleasure is I get to keep my friends. I get to do something that helps me be kind of social, which is I get to keep my friendships. And the short-term pleasure is something about I have to be careful about some of the things that adults like to do. Some of them are not always healthy habits if you do them in a very big way all the time. Sometimes they're meant to be just occasionally. So a short-term pleasure is something that your mind likes to do, and it knows that I'm only going to be allowed to do this for a little bit of time, and then after that, it's at the end. But the mind, it actually likes to have these pleasurable moments. So if it decides that there's nothing in my life that's actually pleasurable that I like doing, like I don't have a hobby, what I'm doing in my life is not fun, like my work isn't fun, my school isn't fun, nothing's fun, then it's actually going to want to rely on these substances because it's the mind's looking for something to make it happy, and this is all that's left. Like nothing else is making it happy. So that's why it's important from a young age to find what it is that you like doing, so that you end up not doing something that brings you that short-term happiness, but then you wake up with this massive headache, and then all you want to do is end up sleeping all day, and then you're just like you're stuck in that cycle, and it's really hard to climb out of that cycle once you're in it. So if you think about this now, you're like, okay, so I have a little bit of short-term pleasures and I know how to draw a limit for myself. So I can say I can only have maybe one drink, because after that I can go home and I can maybe, if I have a little bit of headache, that's okay. I'll just maybe drink a lot of water and then I'll go to sleep. And then the next day I'll be fresh and I can start my day all over again. So, and my brain is already looking forward to something. So I already have something, like maybe my hobby will be that, oh, I'm actually going to be going to the library and there's a new skill I'm going to be learning about technology. So I'm going to be learning how to incorporate, how to add maybe really cool things to my videos. So now you're learning something and you're learning how to almost send it out into the world. So share a video about it into the internet. So you're creating a lot of things for your brain to look forward to that make it happy. Now, the reason we want to understand this is because when you're growing up into high school, a lot of people start to kind of want to experiment with smoking and with alcohol and with drugs, and we call them substances as adults, but they're still drugs. Like it's basically anything that changes the way your mind can think clearly about something. And even though we all know that when you're in high school, you're still really young, like you shouldn't be trying these things, but some parents want to almost allow their kids to try it at home just for a little bit because they know a little bit. If you just have a sip at home, you'll like, I don't even like the taste, and then you'll just stop. But not everybody knows how to do that. So people will want to experiment with this, and then they can actually do a lot of harm to their brain and to their body. So you almost have to be careful about doing this, and then you have to understand, well, what is it that kind of causes these problems, like for kids in high school? And you don't really have to think of it as a problem. It's almost that you just have to think about it that when we are growing up and we are going into our teen years, our brain is learning that, oh my gosh, like there's so many things that I can do. And because your friends are learning the same thing too, they almost want to do all the things that adults are doing because they're like, well, I mean, why not? Like, and especially people who are the kind that are extroverted. I talked last time about introverted people who are a little bit more quieter. Extroverted are people who get really excited really quickly, and they're looking for that in life. So they are usually learning how to drive, and they like the thrill and the adventure of, oh my gosh, I can drive on my own. I can get to places by myself. I don't have to rely on anybody to help me. So these are different kinds of goals, and this is where we have to learn to prioritize. Like, where's something that I know I'm not old enough to maybe do something that I know I shouldn't be doing because the government says I shouldn't, and the government usually knows, like, there's a way that we set standards because we know that you're old enough now that you're actually not going to damage your body in any way. So if we already know this, then we know how to delay gratification, which means we know how to be patient. Like, I know I can do this when I'm older. Maybe I'll wait a little bit. And maybe it's more important for me now to worry about how to take care of my body. So maybe going to the gym is something I can look forward to that's going to be pleasurable. So in this way, if you already know this about yourself and what's coming when I do go to high school or when I do end up going to university, you're almost already planning, like we talked about, like almost like this is a really high expectation, something I'm really hopeful about. And then you almost have something that's like, yeah, but if it doesn't end up meeting my expectation, I won't be way too disappointed, where I almost feel like I have nothing happy in my life to look forward to. Not like my brain has nothing to be happy about to almost help itself kind of stay happy. So I'm going to kind of wonder with you about why um, sometimes it's hard to, depending on, okay, I'm going to try that again. Sometimes when people think about how to think about science and religion and why they want to think about these ideas, they might assume that, you know what, I can do this and I don't have to think about the universe, or I don't have to think about God in that way. I can just continue to create a list and make my life whatever it is. And that's fine. You can do that. And a lot of people do that without a problem. The only thing that I want to try to go back to about talking about dogma and how sometimes going back way into tradition, like 2000 years ago, we almost take for granted that whatever problem they had back then that they tried to solve or are still trying to maybe resolve today but don't really know how to, a lot of the people don't have to also try to resolve or rethink how to think about. So one of the things that I don't really know how to talk about is original sin. And this is the idea that some people believe that we, our babies, are born with a mistake already. Now, there's could be a lot of reasons why we explain this. Some people say because we feel pain, that's what it is. It's almost like God saying, well, because you were in heaven at some point and God told you not to eat from that tree or to go near it, and then you did. So now God's saying, now you have to understand what pain is. That could be a reason. Remember what mythology is. Mythology is just using your imagination to try to understand how to create meaning for your mind and for your heart, to build a story that helps you understand how the universe works. So it's kind of like how to understand God in a way. And as you grow and you kind of question it, you build a guess or like a hypothesis, and then you say, now I'm going to add purpose. Like, why do I have this question? So before we just had the hypothesis, and then we had the method, and then we had the conclusion. Now we want to find the purpose. Like, why am I doing this? Like, why do I want to ask? And who do I want to ask? So that's where you think about inspiration. Like, you're thinking in your heart now, you're like, oh, so I want to understand, for example, why we do feel pain. So then you can start to think, well, maybe it's because I'm not an angel and I'm not a jinn, and I have to understand why I have a brain. So the brain is to help me, that I have to help me understand that I'm here to learn, and there are some things that are harmful. So I almost have to know that I have to draw a limit for myself and know what I shouldn't be learning and when. So for example, if I'm 13, I need to learn that I shouldn't drink alcohol because it's going to give me a headache. If somebody already knows that and they already say, and we're going to make sure nobody does that because you have to be at least 19 or 21 years old to drink, then I don't have to test that. I already know. Everybody's already done their test. So that's where I can build trust now in science and say, yeah, that makes sense. I will wait. Now, if you think about the spirit, you think the spirit is something that lives in all of us because we're breathing. And we want to think that life is the spirit, which is why a lot of people have trouble with people creating violence in the world. They're like, you're almost hurting life. Like, why would you do that? So there's different ways. And like we said, maybe that's just where God said, I'm going to give you 1,000 years to try to learn how to understand technology. And then I'm going to forgive you. So then we can think, okay, that's cool. Now we don't have to think that we're born with sin and we're born with pain. It's just a way for us to learn that gives us an automatic limit. So if something hurts, that means you have to wait and stop and make sure you're not hurting yourself or anybody. And then review, like, how should I do things differently moving on? The next idea is redemption, which means if I do make a mistake, how can I ask to be forgiven? So if you already have the idea that I'm born as just something that I did that was a mistake, does that mean I'm never going to be forgiven? And then you have to kind of wonder, like, but it wasn't even my fault. Like, I wasn't even there. Like, it's not fair that someone made a mistake and I almost have to pay for it. And that's true. And it's almost the reason why God allows us to all understand why we have diversity and why we should learn from other people. So if you made a mistake, for example, by driving when it was really, really snowy without changing your tires, for example, right? And then you didn't end up crashing or anything, but it was really, really hard to drive. So then you ended up having to go to school, to work late, or you ended up just calling late and saying, sorry, I can't come in. And it was like, you could have called us earlier, but it's like, I'm sorry, it was just something that I couldn't do. So me, as somebody who is maybe the boss or someone who works there, be like, yeah, no, but I understand. Sometimes, these things happen, and maybe like we weren't sure that we were going to get a snowstorm so early in the season. People weren't prepared. They didn't change their snow tires. So, okay, that's okay. We'll see what we can do, and then, drive safe. So in that case, it's almost like we allow each other to make mistakes, and we're very, very understanding of how we are as humans. Like, these are things that are out of anybody's control, really. We're just trying our best to plan. So now if you think about this, we're like, okay, so then God does forgive, and we can almost think about a different way of understanding how we're born and why we feel pain, and why some people feel more pain than others. So now I'm thinking, okay, so maybe original sin is something I don't know how to think about, but I want to think about how um, babies are born and why they cry. So if you understand science, you'll say, well, actually, it's a pretty cool thing, because when they cry, they actually have to inhale a lot of oxygen, and that actually helps their lungs open up and grow. So that's a cool thing. Like, if you think, wow, that's really cool how that works. And that's it. You're already almost thinking about how the universe works to help us grow. And then the final thing is, one of the things that we know about when we're stressed or when we're sad because we did something that maybe hurt somebody by accident is that we sometimes need to talk about it. And almost as though to say, I need somebody to help me feel better, or like maybe help me like give me a solution about what I should do. And that's really important, because, and this is what we learned about the prophet, is that when he was 40 years old and he actually got the first revelation from the messenger, he was terrified. He was just like, I'm just staying away from my family or my community, because I don't really understand. There's something that I'm trying to understand it about the universe, and for some reason they don't really have the words to help me understand it. So maybe if I go up to the mountains for a little bit where it's nice and quiet, and I can like just observe what universe and the nature is around me and what it's like, then maybe I'll become inspired. So he's just taking this on his own, and then this angel comes to him and then tells him to read, and he's just like, so his first instinct was like, he was just really, really scared, and he was already married. So he went to his wife, and he was asking her to, like, he was trying to explain, but he probably couldn't talk about it, and he was just like shivering. So what she did was she just wrapped him in like a blanket. And now we understand why God almost allows prophets to exist in the world, to show us how to deal with anxiety, why we need to have people in our life that we trust, and why it's important to comfort people and not to almost laugh at what they might be scared about, because we don't know, right? And so it's really cool, because actually what ended up happening is, she was from a Christian family. So her cousin was from a Christian tradition back from when Jesus was alive on in earth. And he was studying, saying that, oh my gosh, in the Bible it says there is going to be another prophet that's going to come. But he was so old in his age. He was like, oh man, I really wish that I would be around when you're older and spreading your new ideas, because it's usually very, very hard for cultures to adapt to new ideas. And I hope that people don't give you a hard time. So it kind of reassured his wife, and like Khadija, she got a little bit reassured. She's kind of nervous, like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? But she was a very powerful woman. She's very strong, and she knows how to understand some things about life and how to run a business. So she was happy to support the prophet, and he was almost reassured too. But he's like, I don't even know what to expect here. So he's just like, okay, I'm gonna try my best. So after a few times, because she wrapped him in that cloth, and we know that now about shock, is that when people go into shock, it's important to actually wrap them so that their organs don't shut down and then they die. So, and that's really cool too about childbirth. When you think about babies when they're born, they actually feel better it's called swaddling. Like, it just almost reminds them of when they were in their mommy's stomach. It's like the most comforting part for their kind of existence. So if you think about what happened there, when the prophet went to his wife and said that he was really nervous about something, the first thing that she did was wrap him in clothes, like, or in a blanket. So I don't know how long after that happened, God sent a chapter, and in it he said to the prophet, he didn't call him by his name, Muhammad or Muhammad. He said, "Oh, the one who's wrapped in clothing." Almost to say, like, he heard what Khadija did and he liked it. So he's like, I'm going to use that to say that I like the way you guys are thinking and using your brain. And I'm going to make that sort of like part of your culture. And that's exactly what happens. It's almost like God lets the angels inspire how to problem solve. And then he almost confirms that this is okay. And then it just becomes part of the way people adapt and evolve with time. So if you think now to present day, when I'm talking about the way people choose to dress, for example, like right now I'm wearing like a long sleeved hoodie almost. Sometimes you'll see me wearing tank tops. And this is something that's very new to me. Before I used to wear more loose fitting clothing. I used to wear the veil. And I started to think about like, I wonder what would happen if I changed how I dress, because the culture here in Canada it's very diverse. I could wear anything and anybody would be like, yeah, that's normal still. Like it's not really a big difference. But for me, I want to understand what the difference that would be for me and how I would end up kind of understanding my own self and how other people might understand who I am, maybe. So this is a way to understand why culture is very important, and we shouldn't try to choose or assume that any one culture is more important than another. We should try to understand what people's tradition and heritages are and why they like their culture, and how almost like all practices are good until they end up hurting somebody in some way. So if you think of drinking alcohol, for example, the reason that back at the time of the prophet that it was maybe said that it has some benefit in it, but right now the benefit is not very much and the harm is like really, really big. So one of the stories was that the prophet's cousin Ali, he actually had I think he had a camel. I laugh at this story because um, the way we think about how the prophet was, he almost reminds me of somebody who's just like constantly frustrated with people and he doesn't know how to be angry. But when he did get angry at something, it was usually because somebody had did something that would hurt somebody else in a really big way. So anyway, I think Ali he was planning to get married and he wanted to get married to the prophet's daughter, Fatima. And he had a camel and he was almost going to use the camel as a way to sometimes people, when they have weddings, they have really, really big celebrations or ceremonies, and they want to invite people and they want to feed them. So I think what he planned to do was use that camel to sacrifice it and kind of create camel meat. Some people eat that. And some people use, so like different meats for some, I don't know, some diets now are very, very diverse. I don't really know. But anyway, back then, I think that was the scenario. But then I don't remember which one, it might have been one of the prophet's uncles. He got really, really drunk. And sometimes when people have a lot to drink, they're not thinking very clearly and they might do something that they think is funny at the time and it might not actually be. And so by accident, he walked out and because he was so drunk, he actually killed the camel by accident. And the Quran tells us we're not allowed to eat an animal that was already dead. Like if it wasn't sacrificed properly and you eat it, it actually might make you sick. So Ali was like, what just happened? So because the prophet knows about this scenario and he's just like, well, that's okay, like maybe there's a reason for this. And the reason ended up being that sometimes you don't have to have big celebrations for weddings. Sometimes it's okay to keep it, like if you can't afford it, well, Ali couldn't afford it anymore, so it's almost like a way to say it's okay, there's lots of different options. And if the prophet's allowing that for his daughter and he loved her very much, then it's okay for us to think about how to make life easier for people. So what ended up happening was the only thing he had was a shield, and he just kind of gifted her the shield as though like this is all I have, and that became kind of like a wedding gift. So if you think about what I was talking about before with like desire and expectations, and then how sometimes things like, oh my gosh, what just happened, knowing how to understand the universe can help you with science. So almost knowing that even though science helps me answer all my questions, if things like this that look like a disaster happen and I don't have an understanding that maybe there's a bigger purpose and something I have to understand that's going to help me not kind of become very upset about it, then in that scenario, it's good to have an understanding of the universe. Some people call it God. I don't know how to call it God, but that's basically what I wanted to kind of get at and kind of conclude with for today.